10. Taking out a hit on the mother-in-law. In 2021, Lee Ann Bauman, a realtor and mother from Missouri, tried to hire a hitman to kill her ex-husband's mother, allegedly. Her trial is scheduled for sometime in 2022, so she hasn't technically been proven guilty yet. She has, however, been charged with conspiracy to commit murder. She supposedly plotted with a hitman to have her mother-in-law appear as though she had gotten into a fatal accident. Why? All because Lee was convinced the mother-in-law was causing unnecessary strain in her relationship with her daughters. Lee is a world record powerboater from the Ozarks who was prepared to pay $1,500 to have the hit taken out on her mother-in-law. She was quoted as telling a friend that she knew murder was wrong as a Christian, but could simply go to church and ask for forgiveness when everything was said and done. We're not sure if that's how it works, but Lee certainly believed her soul would be cleansed in the end. According to documents from the court proceedings, Lee was worried that her ex-spouse and his mom were preparing to take her to court. She believed they were plotting to take her children away from her. And in that way, you can almost sympathize with Lee. She was desperate not to lose her kids, and so she went to some pretty ridiculous lengths to keep them. But her plan unraveled when her friend contacted a lawyer about the hitman, who then alerted the police. Even though she didn't actually pay anyone to do anything, the fact that she was trying was enough to get her locked up. 9. The murderous grandmother. On February 11, 2014, a grandmother shot her son-in-law in his home. She has since been sentenced to spend the next 50 years in prison by the Vista Superior Court. Considering Cynthia Sabaco was already 65 years old when she was put into custody, it doesn't look like she'll ever see the light of day again. But let's back things up a bit. On February 11th in California, about 8 o'clock in the morning, Cynthia should have been celebrating her 63rd birthday. Instead, she went to the house of her 53-year-old son-in-law, furious about some mean comments he had made about her to some other family members. She went into his apartment, ambushed him as he held a basket of laundry, and emptied her gun. But wait, it gets even more brutal. Cynthia unloaded her pistol into this guy, then went back to her car for more bullets, and returned to the apartment to shoot him again. The grandmother then went for some bacon and eggs at a local diner, ditched the gun at a nearby casino, and was apprehended by detectives while having a late afternoon coffee. 8. A controversial murder case. A woman in China, identified by court documents as Feng, was married for 6 months when she became the victim of a violent beating. On January 31, 2019, at just 22 years old, she was brutally killed by her husband and her in-laws. The reason behind the killing was that she had been unable to conceive a child. After 6 months of no baby, the husband and his parents were so angry that they bludgeoned this poor, innocent woman like a bunch of rabid demons. But that's not all. During court proceedings in Shandong, it was revealed that the woman's husband and his parents had also abused her. They wouldn't give her any food, they left her outside in the freezing cold like a dog, and finally finished things off with a deadly assault. It was one of the worst cases of in-laws gone wrong in recent memory. Here's where things got very controversial in China. The husband and the in-laws were only sentenced to 2 years in prison. They were given lenient punishments because they confessed all the relevant facts of the crime. Basically, the court said since they told the truth, they wouldn't get into trouble. But this caused nationwide fury. The public erupted so angrily that a retrial was called. However, there's been no news on what happened with the retrial. Right now, it looks like this was just said to calm the public down, and nothing is actually being done. 7. Death over exotic birds. After Pat Brown had a near-death experience, he started adopting and collecting exotic birds. It made Pat happy, and she really found solace in being surrounded by all of her nice birdies. Her husband, on the other hand, well, he didn't quite understand or appreciate the birds slowly filling up the house. Pat's husband, Fred, didn't like the birds one bit. The couple had been married for 20 years, but the birds just proved to be too much. It drove a wedge between the pair, ruining their relationship and resulting in murder. Pat suffered from high blood pressure and had to undergo open heart surgery in the year 1990. She healed up at her mother's house in Alabama for several months after. And even though her strength returned and she got better, she was never really the same. She ended up breeding between 50 and 60 exotic birds in her house. Fred may have hated it, but he didn't want to get a divorce, and he tried his best to be at peace. On the morning of April 25, 1991, Fred Brown was found dead on the side of Highway 68, next to an abandoned car. He had been shot 3 times, execution style. In the police investigation that followed, the cops immediately suspected Pat. People close to the couple admitted Pat had been verbally abusive to her husband. However, she had a rock-solid alibi. 3 years after the murder, police in Pennsylvania cracked the case. They had been given a letter written by the estranged husband of Pat's sister, or Fred's brother-in-law. He admitted to being hired by Pat to get rid of her husband. Pat had wanted the insurance money to buy a bigger house so she could breed more birds. The killer's name was Leroy Wenzel. He had given the letter to his daughter only to be read in the case of his death, but she read the letter anyway and then gave it to the police. As it turned out, Leroy had agreed to kill his distant brother-in-law for $30,000, and Pat had orchestrated the whole thing. 6. A foursome of killers. A woman was killed by her daughter-in-law in January of 2014. She was 80 years old at the time when she was brutally beaten and stabbed by Diana Nadell. Diana and 3 other women from across the country have all been charged in connection to the murder. This is a weird case. First of all, the victim's name is Peggy Nadell. Her son is married to Diana. Diana committed the murder with Andrea Benson of Washington, D.C., whom she hired specifically to do the heavy lifting. Here's how it all went down. Diana planned the killing in advance, motivated by Peggy's $4 million estate. She was hoping to get half of that estate money immediately, since the old woman was living much longer than she had hoped. She met Andrea Benson on January 24, 2014. Then they traveled to Peggy's home together, went inside, and dragged her down the stairs into the basement. There, the 2 women worked together to kill a woman in her 80s. It was despicable and terrible, and both women were given sentences to match their crimes. Andrea Benson was given 20 years to life, while Diana was given 23 years. 5. The Sleepwalker Killer. Kenneth Parks killed his mother-in-law in May of 1987. He was acquitted of the killing because he claimed he did it while sleepwalking and wasn't technically responsible. Yet this is some pretty intense sleepwalking. Kenneth drove 14 miles to the house of his mother-in-law, beat her with a tire iron, and then stabbed her until she was dead, all while fast asleep. He also tried to kill his father-in-law, but was thwarted before he could deliver the final blow. It was all very awful. There aren't really any other words to describe it. Barbara Woods never in a million years thought she would wake up in the middle of the night to see her daughter's husband standing over her with a weapon. When Barbara's husband tried to intervene, he was stabbed and strangled. Afterward, when Kenneth finally snapped out of his sleeping state, he fled to a police station and admitted what he believed he had done. Here's what was said in court. Doctors testified at the trial that there have been at least 30 cases of murder committed by people sleepwalking. Remember, this was in the 80s. Who knows how many people could have killed someone in their sleep since then? The doctors went on to say Kenneth would have been able to drive 14 miles while in a sleep state, then violently attack somebody. When asked what could have triggered such violence, it was attributed to stress. Kenneth was stressed because he was addicted to gambling and had recently embezzled $28,000. He also had a family history of sleepwalking and had been caught on at least 2 other occasions. In the end, Kenneth was acquitted on the murder charge. However, his personal life became pretty rough. Even if you kill someone by accident in your sleep, people still look at you like a murderer. 4. A recently purchased gun. Frederick J. Clea has been charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. He killed his wife and his mother-in-law on a lazy Saturday afternoon in Pennsylvania, 2020. According to the Montgomery County District Attorney's Office, the victims are Latia Clea and her mom, Makinda Saunders. When the police were called to the home due to reports of gunfire, Frederick answered the door. He admitted what he had done, and the cops found both women dead inside the house. It was terrible and tragic, and had to do with an argument Frederick and his wife were having. But here's where things get spooky. Frederick knew he was going to do something crazy. The police investigation learned that he had recently purchased a Glock, right after he and his wife had started fighting. Plus, Joe Saunders, whose sister and mother were murdered, said he had recently gotten a phone call from his mom asking for information. She wanted to know his social security number because he was finishing up her will. Clearly, the mother-in-law felt something terrible brewing. At the time of the shooting, it was the 4th homicide in Montgomery County since the beginning of the pandemic. Authorities were dealing with a huge uptick in domestic violence ever since people got shuttered inside their houses. It looks like Frederick just couldn't take it anymore, and being cooped up led him to do something he could never come back from. 3. Tired of his mother-in-law. A woman in New Jersey was beaten to death by her son-in-law in a terrible and unforgivable act of violence. Her name was Barbara Ann Bizzoni. She was discovered unresponsive with several injuries at her home 2 days after the assault started in December of 2021. It was her killer, James Pica, who phoned the police and confessed the crime. The attack began 2 days prior, then continued off and on for 48 hours, until James finally realized he had made a huge mistake and turned himself in. The grimy details of why and how this all unfolded are extremely unsettling. James told the police that he was angry, exhausted, and fed up with being the sole caretaker of his 84-year-old mother-in-law. James lived with his husband and his husband's mom and had to take care of both of them. He was the sole provider in the house, and he just snapped. He hit the old woman in the head, she fell to the floor, and then he kicked her. She was in such a bad place already that he didn't know what to do and simply worked himself into a frenzy. For 2 days, he beat her mercilessly while his husband cried and begged for him to stop. It was only when she was in her final moments of life that he called the police. 2. No personal space. A man in Missouri had a fairly similar experience to the evil killer we just talked about, James Pica. He was also sick and tired of his in-laws, but instead of beating up an old woman, he went on an insane killing spree. His name is Jesse Wee, and he's been charged with 3 counts of murder. At the end of March 2021, he shot and killed his wife, her mother, and her stepfather, Tanya Wee, Linda Kohler, and Ronald Kohler. According to the Greene County Sheriff's Office, Jesse called dispatch admitting that he had just shot 3 people, and then calmly explained why. Jesse told the 911 dispatcher he had been waiting over a week for his in-laws to leave his house. They showed up and started squatting with Jesse and his wife, and he absolutely hated it. He continuously told his in-laws to leave, but they wouldn't. They just kept coming. They were sleeping over and had basically moved in. When it became clear Jesse was in an impossible situation, he decided to kill everyone. There were definitely some better ways he could have solved his problem, but that's what he did. Jesse's family is now dead, and he's going to jail for the rest of his life. 1. Covering up a murder. In September of 2016, Carolyn Della Rose Nielsen from Adelaide in Australia may or may not have murdered her mother-in-law and then tried to cover it up with a fake home invasion. When the police arrived at the scene of the crime, they found the victim dead in the laundry room and her daughter-in-law hysterical in the driveway. Caroline told neighbors and police that they had been the victims of a home invasion, but the evidence said otherwise. Prosecutors said the smartwatch Myrna was wearing put her time of death differently than her daughter's timeline of events. They could see from the watch that immediately after she disconnected from the Bluetooth of her vehicle and walked into her house, there was a spike in activity and then her heart stopped. This didn't fit in with what Caroline said. Caroline claimed 2 or 3 men broke into their house, tied them up, beat Myrna to death, and then escaped. Yet they didn't steal anything. It just didn't really make sense. What's crazy is that Caroline got away with murder, if she was indeed responsible. There were 2 trials. The first was inconclusive, and the second went on for 6 weeks. In the end, the jury deliberated for 3 days, but found Caroline not guilty of murder. They couldn't reach a guilty verdict on the charge of manslaughter, and so the whole thing was dropped. 10. The Lipstick Bounty Hunters. 2013 was a bad year for female bounty hunters. In California, a man sued a group known as the Lipstick Bounty Hunters after they attacked him in an Arby's restaurant. The bounty hunters shot him with rubber bullets, zapped him with a stun gun, broke his nose, and blinded him with pepper spray. The victim, Daniel Duvall, had been trying to enjoy a nice and easy lunch at the fast food joint when the women, clad all in pink and wielding weapons, came out of nowhere and used everything they could to subdue him like he was the most wanted man in America. To be fair, Daniel was wanted. He had a $4,000 debt owed to a bail bond company related to charges of drugs and weapons, but he claimed it was no excuse to come after him with such unyielding force. It was all captured on video, too, and uploaded by the Lipstick Bounty Hunters. The women rushed the restaurant, hit him with a stun gun, shot him twice in the eyeball, basically straight up assaulted him. Yet even with all the excessive force, he still managed to get in his car and drive away. In response to the allegations of excessive force, the owner of the Lipstick Bounty Hunters, Teresa Galt, told News 8 that they didn't use enough force. She said that by law, they are allowed to use enough force as necessary to make an arrest. But of course, that's not true. They were slapped with a lawsuit for millions of dollars. 9. The Wrong Address. 3 bounty hunters have gotten into some serious trouble for kicking down a man's door and holding him at gunpoint. Not only did this trio of bounty hunters hold a gun on the man, but they pointed loaded weapons at his 16-year-old child. They may have gotten away with it if not for the fact that the man they were pointing their guns at had nothing to do with the person they were looking for. It was the wrong house entirely. Imagine the terror the man must have felt when 3 armed men broke through his front door in Nashville and started screaming at him. His poor kid, too. The accidental break-in happened on February 8, 2021. Bounty hunter Khalil Abdullah and 2 men under his employ charged into the home of Lavaris Comer looking for a totally different man named Tavares. They knocked him to the ground, held guns on him, and didn't listen to a word he said in protest. It took a few minutes, but they did eventually realize their mistake. At that point, the 3 bounty hunters turned and fled. Unfortunately for them, Lavaris ran out of his house and managed to get their license plate number as they were speeding off. 2 months after the incident, on April 15th, the bounty hunters were arrested and charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. They also faced aggravated criminal trespass charges. 8. Kidnapped for ransom. On November 4, 2021, a man in Aurora, Colorado was kidnapped at gunpoint in front of his family by a bounty hunter who seriously overstepped his boundaries. 5 men dressed in black and armed to the teeth stormed the apartment of Jose Salguero Martinez. They took him to a Best Western hotel in handcuffs and with a black hood over his head. Once they got him into the room, they phoned his aunt and told her that if she didn't give them $1,500 in cash, they were going to hand Jose over to the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. It had nothing to do with a criminal case. It was a simple act of extortion. The aunt went to family members and managed to raise the $1,500 plus $250 to pay for the bounty hunter's hotel room. But when they brought the cash, the bounty hunters demanded another $5,000. The extra money was to make the warrants with ICE go away. It was only now that the family realized they were being extorted. They phoned the Denver police, who went to the hotel room and didn't do anything. They said they didn't see anything suspicious and walked away from the kidnapping. The kidnappers then took their hostage and moved to a different hotel. The family continued to contact the police and eventually convinced them to contact ICE. ICE said they had no reason for Jose to be arrested. They also don't use bounty hunters. The police had to go back to the hotel room, and 2 of the kidnappers were arrested and charged with second-degree kidnapping. The other 3 involved managed to get away and are still at large. 7. From hunter to killer. Palm Springs bounty hunter Fabian Hector Herrera is accused of fatally shooting a fugitive in front of police officers while trying to make an arrest. It happened on April 23, 2021, when Fabian entered the home of David Spahn at about 2:30 in the morning. He was there at the behest of a bail bond agency because David had allegedly disabled the GPS device he was supposed to be wearing in accordance with his bail agreement. He had originally been arrested on a misdemeanor charge for violating a protection order. But everything went south very quickly. David initially called the police because somebody was trying to break into his home. His alarm company was also reporting that there was a break-in. By the time officers arrived, Fabian had already entered the house and was in a standoff with David. David had picked up a knife and was waving it at Fabian and the police officers. When one of the cops told him to put the knife down, he refused. The officer then used a stun gun, but it didn't work. David continued to advance with the knife, and that was when the officer said, "Shoot." Fabian assumed he was talking about shooting the man with his gun, and so he opened fire on David. This is where things get convoluted and controversial. The police officer didn't want Fabian to shoot David with his gun, but assumed he had a stun gun. He thought he was talking to another cop, not a bounty hunter. And yet, prior to the incident, Fabian had identified himself as a bounty hunter and not an officer of the law. It was a very strange misunderstanding that left one man dead. Fabian has since been arrested and charged with murder, and so too has his mother for supplying David with a firearm and committing perjury. However, Fabian has pleaded not guilty. Plus, body cam footage of the incident proves the officer told Fabian to shoot. We're just waiting now for the case to go to trial. How do you think this case should turn out in court? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to hit subscribe before the end of the video. 6. Impersonating a U.S. Marshal. A supposed freelance bounty hunter was arrested after impersonating a federal law enforcement officer. It happened on November 22, 2021. Jeremy Hughes walked into a business in Berkeley County and told the employees he was a U.S. Marshal on a manhunt. He was carrying a shotgun and had a pistol holstered on his side. He was also wearing a shirt that had police written on it, as if this is the defining thing that makes people believe you're a cop. Jeremy told the employees of the business he was looking for a man dressed all in orange who had been spotted in the nearby woods. He then left the business and called them back 10 minutes later to say he had captured the individual. When the police caught up to Jeremy, they found he was in possession of several firearms and a whole heap of methamphetamine. They also learned that he had never arrested anyone and wasn't even a bounty hunter. He was just really high on meth and running around pretending to be either a freelance bounty hunter or a U.S. Marshal. What the heck? 5. The death of Randy Howard. In 2015, a bounty hunter shot a 65-year-old country singer named Randy Howard to death. Randy may have been an outlaw in his old age, but he was also a veteran musician who had released 7 records and performed on stage with some of the most influential country music stars in history. Randy was all about the country and all about the outlaw lifestyle. He even made sure that his final moments on Earth were spent in a shootout. It was the night of July 9th when bounty hunter Jackie Shell tried to serve Randy with a bench warrant on a failure to appear. The country music singer was facing charges on his 4th DUI, as well as some other criminal charges. Jackie had been authorized by a bail bonding company over 80 miles away in the Tennessee town of Dunlap to bring him in. Jackie, a former detective, easily tracked Randy down to the house where he lived by himself. At some point during the altercation, shots were fired. Randy ended up dead, and Jackie had to be taken to the hospital for emergency surgery. Jackie lived. He also managed to escape any kind of homicide charge because he claimed Randy shot first. The truth is that if the old country singer was drinking and alone and Randy tried barging into his home, that's probably exactly what happened. 4. Targeting the chief of police. In 2015, a bounty hunter accidentally targeted the police chief of Phoenix in one of the most botched raids imaginable. His name is Brent Farley, and he was arrested after he and some friends, fellow bounty hunters, swarmed the house of Police Chief Joseph Yonner. Everyone in the group was armed, they looked extremely dangerous, and they were looking for a drug suspect from Oklahoma. This is a really weird case. Brent was not and is not a licensed bounty hunter, and yet he and his crew of armed men showed up to the chief's house and refused to leave his property while threatening him with their weapons. How did this go so wrong? Well, Brent had gotten a tip via social media that the suspect he was looking for was at the house, but it was obviously fake. The tip given by a man named Aaron Bray. Aaron presumably thought it would be funny to send the bounty hunter to the house of the police chief. In the end, the bungled raid saw Brent get 2 years of probation, while Aaron was arrested and also sentenced to 2 years of probation. No one involved thought it was funny. 3. Dog the bounty hunter's Justin Bahog. In 2020, Justin Bahog from the show Dog the Bounty Hunter was arrested in Colorado in connection with violating probation. Probation he had been given because of a domestic violence charge. Justin is not actually related to Dog, but is the son of Moon Angel, the woman Dog allegedly started dating after Beth passed away in 2019. Justin was also on the wrong side of a feud between him and Lisa Chapman, Dog's daughter. She'd accused him of trying to steal her stepmom's ashes. It was Lisa Chapman who tipped off the Edgewater Police Department after she got a hold of videos showing Justin drinking alcohol, something he wasn't allowed to do on probation. She was the one who had officers sent to his house, where they found him drinking and smoking dope. Justin was arrested for violating his probation, but later released without any real repercussions. This was just one more dramatic twist in the story of America's favorite bounty hunter, who hasn't done much but caused drama since his TV show ended. 2. An illegal assault. In 2018, a pair of bounty hunters from North Carolina beat up a man named Charlie Levy and tried to arrest him. But according to the Galloway police in Tennessee, where the incident took place, the bounty hunters had no right to be there, nor did the victim have an active warrant. When Charlie opened the door to see who was banging on it, one of the bounty hunters grabbed his hand and put him in cuffs. They pulled him off his porch, jumped on him, and started beating him senseless for no reason. They broke his eye socket and shattered his nose as he lay under them screaming for help. Charlie's fiancée watched in horror from the doorway, then ran inside to get the phone and called the police. When the cops came, they arrested William Delaney and Todd Stubbs. The pair of bounty hunters were trying to extradite Charlie out of Memphis back to North Carolina on a bond forfeiture from the year before, but they weren't actually allowed to do this, and the whole mess landed them in jail on charges of aggravated assault and kidnapping. Poor Charlie, who had never seen the vicious assault coming, had to undergo surgery to get his face fixed from the brutal beating. 1. Bale agent shot down. Bounty hunter James Black from Lake Elsinore was gunned down by a rabid fugitive at a hotel in Moreno Valley. It happened on December 4, 2019. The bounty hunter had been trying to apprehend Chad James Green when everything went terribly wrong. James had managed to track Chad down to a sleazy motel, but when he went in for the arrest, Chad surprised him with a loaded weapon and shot the man to death, then leaped from a third-story window and ran away. It was a surprise ambush that left the father of 5 and a war hero dead in the last place he had probably wanted to die. Chad was identified as the shooter and police tracked him down to a business park. When they cornered him, Chad shot at the deputies. It turned into a gun battle, which left Chad dead, and all because Chad had skipped Bale.
Number 10. Death in Costa Rica. Carla Stefaniak was on vacation in Costa Rica when she was killed. Carla was from the Miami Beach area and had gone on a trip with her sister-in-law, April Burton. They were there to celebrate Carla's birthday, but her sister-in-law had to return to Florida the day before Carla's flight. This left Carla alone for just 24 hours. The last time she was seen alive was when the two women said their goodbyes at the airport on November 27, 2018. Carla never made her flight home on April 28th. As it turned out, a security guard who'd been staying in the room next door to her was a brutal murderer. Her body was discovered partially buried and covered over in plastic bags near the Airbnb villa where they were both staying in San Jose. The police said her remains were riddled with stab wounds and she had suffered a serious blow to the head. The day of her death, Carla had been texting friends that it was raining out and that her power had been interrupted at her accommodation. Her last text was sent at 9 o'clock, local time. It was after that that the security guard, identified as 32-year-old Bismarck Espinoza Martinez of Nicaragua, made his move. He attacked the woman and killed her completely unprovoked. But the security guard didn't cover his tracks, and he was arrested quickly. He's since been sentenced to 16 years in a Costa Rican prison. Number 9. Struck by lightning. A security guard in Indonesia got the shock of a lifetime when he was electrocuted on December 20th, 2021. It was a terrifying ordeal for the security guard, who had been walking around in the rain with an umbrella when he was struck by lightning. The umbrella acted like a lightning rod, attracting a great bolt of electricity that knocked the man to the ground. The security guard's name is Abdul Razid. He had been patrolling a rainy courtyard in the coastal Indonesian town of Cilincing, North Jakarta. His encounter with the bolt of lightning was captured on video. In the footage, he can be seen strolling through the rain with his umbrella. Then the lightning bolt zapped his umbrella, disintegrating it in a shower of sparks and sending the security guard falling to the ground. Luckily, there were other security guards in the area who saw what happened. They ran to his rescue, managed to get him to the hospital, and he survived. He suffered only minor burns to his hands and was discharged from the hospital 4 days later. Number 8. McDonald's Security. A woman in Birmingham, England, was caught on video throwing her drink at a McDonald's security guard in front of the restaurant early on a Sunday morning in the summer of 2021. The woman appeared to be extremely wasted and had gone out of her way to pick a fight with the guard. In the shocking video footage, the woman can be seen walking to the front entrance of the restaurant, stopping in front of the security guard, then deliberately emptying her drink on her head. It's not exactly clear what made her think she could get away with this. You can tell in the footage it was a deliberate and malicious attack on behalf of the drunk woman. You can also see that it didn't turn out the way she had probably been hoping. The security guard was so mad that he grabbed her, pulled out a baton, and beat the snot out of her. Obviously, the security guard was also in the wrong here. He hit her once extremely hard with the baton, knocking her to the ground. He then proceeded to kick her while she was down, right in the face, and added a few more whacks with the baton for good measure. He walked away, seemingly satisfied, but the woman got up and shouted at him, and so he went in for a second round of beating. After the video of the attack went viral, the 47-year-old security guard was arrested for assault. Who do you think is in the wrong in this scenario? Number 7. Beaten with his own radio. A Delta Airlines security officer was viciously assaulted at JFK Airport in New York by a trio of savage women. The attack happened in a jetway in September of 2021. The security officer informed the women that they were not able to board their flight in San Juan, Puerto Rico. He said they were disoriented and visibly intoxicated and refused to properly wear their masks. The security officer notified the crew about the situation with the three, and the captain and other employees confirmed they were not allowed to fly. When he asked if they would please leave, they refused. The women became belligerent, screaming and shouting at him, and then attacked. When the three attacked, they managed to rip away the security guard's radio and then beat him violently with it. Poor guy was literally beaten with his very own radio, knocked to the ground on the jetway, and then kicked. When a gate agent came rushing to his assistance, the women then turned on him. They punched the guy in the face, knocking him to the ground, as well as continuing their vicious assault on the two men. Both had been treated at the hospital for serious injuries. Obviously, you can't get away with this kind of thing in an airport of all places. All three women were arrested and charged with assault. They're currently out on bail, but could each face 10 years in prison if convicted. Number 6. Shoplifting gone wrong. A security guard working for a Boston fashion retailer got in major trouble for the way he handled a shoplifter on June 9, 2019. The security guard, identified as Muhammad Khan, was charged with assault and battery on a child under the age of 14 after beating up an 11-year-old who had tried to shoplift. What did she try to steal? According to the victim's mother, Sharice Williams, her daughter had tried to get away with a package of socks. The preteen took the pack of socks, was on her way out the door, and the security guard grabbed her. To make the incident even more traumatic for the young girl, the security guard was wearing normal clothing. He wasn't dressed like a security guard, and so the girl thought it was some random man trying to carry her away. Muhammad grabbed her, pulled her back into the store, pushed her into a corner, and then punched her in the face. He had her by the neck, straddling her as he raised down blows on the child. And this guy is over 6 feet tall and over 200 pounds. This is obviously not an appropriate reaction for a security guard stopping a child or adult from stealing socks. He was under explicit orders from his employer not to ever lay hands on a customer, even a shoplifter. He had also been warned 4 times previously for inappropriate behavior. The young girl is now traumatized and is in counseling, according to her mother. The security guard is facing jail time. Number 5. Murder in Florida. Sasha Samsonen was killed by the person who was supposed to protect her. The 27-year-old Florida woman was murdered inside of her apartment in October of 2015 by none other than the security guard hired to keep her safe. His name is Michael Duxbury, and he's been charged with first-degree murder. Police found his fingerprints and footprints inside Sasha's home, directly connecting him to the murder. The unfortunate victim had returned home from a night out with her friends, but didn't get back to anybody the next day. Her friends became suspicious and called the cops. Officers were sent to her home, where they discovered Sasha's body, her clothes ripped, and the toilet seat left up. The killer had wrapped her in a comforter and left her on the bed. It didn't take much for the police to figure out exactly what happened. Sasha was drunk when she came home last night. Michael saw her as an easy victim, and he used his access as a security guard to let himself into her home and kill her. Number 4. Stabbed at Walmart. Ron Bevan was working as a security guard at a Walmart in Campbell River, British Columbia, for just over a month when he was stabbed. It was the holiday season, 2021, and people were stressed and aggressive, especially at Walmart. One particular customer was crazier than the rest. He wasn't adhering to the store's rules, and so Ron asked if he would please remove himself from the premises. Rather than do that, the man attacked with a blade. The blade hit Ron's stab-proof vest, but still slashed his skin beneath. It was lucky an ER nurse happened to be on the scene and was able to tend to Ron, who lost a lot of blood. He was whisked to the hospital and went on to make a full recovery. As for the attacker, his name is Nathan Sprout, and he's been charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Number 3. Impersonating a cop. A security guard bit off more than he can chew when he tried to impersonate an officer in March of 2020 and found himself being arrested. This bizarre case comes to us from Florida, where a security guard dressed up like an actual police officer tried to pull over an off-duty cop for speeding. Omar Ford was on his way home from his job as a security guard when a vehicle passed him at a very high speed. The cop appeared to be swerving, and Omar was worried that the driver was drunk. So he pulled up alongside the car with an intention of saying something to the driver, but as he was in the process of doing this, the car flashed its lights. It was an off-duty cop who was speeding down the road, and the whole thing blew up in Omar's face. The cop slowed down, got behind Omar's car, and then flashed his own lights. He pulled the security guard over and was shocked to see Omar was wearing a vest with Criminal Task Force written on it, equipped with a badge, gun, and taser. Criminal Task Force is the name of Omar's security business, but he still looked a lot like a cop. He looked enough like a real officer that a lot of ordinary people probably would have assumed he was some kind of authority. He may not have technically been trying to impersonate a police officer. He didn't pull anyone over and pretend to be a cop, but he got charged with it anyway. You might say his biggest crime was bothering a real police officer who was trying to speed with impunity. Number 2. The security officer who snapped. At Horace Mann Middle School in Florida, a security guard got into a fight with one of the students in August of 2021. The security officer, a grown man by the name of Antoine Ruffin, was arrested when he willfully and intentionally punched a student who refused to go to class. The unusual altercation was caught on video by another student who saw the whole thing unfold. The security guard can be heard screaming at the student, telling him to go to class. He was getting extremely agitated and seemed to be working himself into a frenzy the louder he screamed. Finally, he lashed out and punched the student square in the chest. Nobody was injured, but this was obviously something that shouldn't have happened. The security guard, after very much overstepping his boundaries, is now facing charges of child abuse. And number 1, shooting a grandmother. It was February 1st, 2022, when security guard Victor Brown shot and killed an innocent grandmother who had been minding her own business in the street. Her name was Bobby Johnson, and she never saw it coming. The incident started at a Chicago liquor store where Victor worked as the store security. He was approached by a man who was no longer allowed in this particular place of business, and Victor told the guy to leave. But Victor also became belligerent and aggressive, putting his fists in the man's face. The man responded by firing a shot from a handgun he had concealed in his pocket. The bullet hit Victor in the leg, and seconds later, a shootout had erupted. Victor fell to the ground, pulled out his handgun, and started firing at the man as he ran away. Victor shot at least 20 live rounds as the guy fled down the block, shooting even as he crossed a busy intersection. One of these bullets happened to hit Bobby Johnson as she was walking down the street, killing her. In the aftermath, one innocent woman was left dead. The man who shot Victor is still at large, and the security guard has been charged with first-degree murder as a result of his recklessness. Would you rather be the security guard of a Walmart, a liquor store, or a McDonald's? Which do you think is more dangerous? Let us know in the comments, and thanks for watching. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and I'll see you on the next one.